I work as a locomotive assistant on the railroad, the lowest rung in the hierarchy of train operations. My days are filled with wiping diesel off engines, clearing ice from running gear, and sipping tea in the warmth of the cab. It's a job that suits a 20-year-old fresh out of university, steady pay, and a sense of purpose. But there are downsides: the constant stench of diesel that clings to my clothes and the sleepless nights that often accompany my shifts. And it's during one of those sleepless nights that I want to recount to you. It was about 2 years ago, in the heart of January. I had just begun to work independently, stationed at a sprawling depot in the center of a military town, a good 50 kilometers from my home. My living situation was a rented apartment, a step towards independence that sometimes left me feeling more alone than liberated. My 5th shift was approaching, a night shift this time. Sitting at my laptop, I glanced at the clock. 4:02 flashed in front of me. I sighed deeply, resigning myself to another night without sleep. Just as I settled in, the shrill ring of my phone broke the quiet. It was Andy, my seasoned engineer, a cheerful 60-year-old who knew our locomotive like the back of his hand. "Hey there, Jim," Andy's voice crackled through the phone. "Listen, I won't be able to make it tonight. Urgent trip to the city. Took a day off. When you get to the depot, check in with the dispatcher. They'll pair you up with another engineer for this shift. I'll be back for the next one." His voice was strained, an unusual hesitation lacing his usually jovial tone. "Everything okay, Andy?" I pressed, concern seeping into my voice. "Everything's fine," he replied abruptly, almost defensively. "Wife's brother, that's all. Don't be nosy, Jim. Just keep that engine room in top shape." I chuckled lightly, trying to ease the tension. "All right, safe travels then," but Andy had already hung up, leaving me staring at the silent phone with a furrowed brow before returning to the show on my laptop. As the hours passed, I checked the weather forecast: a bone-chilling -26 degrees Celsius and a thick blanket of supercooled fog. It was shaping up to be a challenging shift. After gearing up, I made my way to the depot and checked in with the dispatcher, who introduced me to my replacement engineer, a tall, sturdy 26-year-old who had recently completed his training. He seemed pleasant enough, a relief given the circumstances. We made our way to our assigned locomotive, heading for the gravel base, a routine assignment for new engineers. Not surprised they stuck you on gravel duty, I thought to myself. Where else would they put a greenhorn? Just shuttling cars back and forth all night. With Andy absent, I hoped for a smooth shift: no vigilance checks missed, no speed limits exceeded. Andy always had bad luck on gravel duty, and I had no desire to face our boss over a mishap. The first half of the shift passed uneventfully. The train rumbled along, the hum of the engine a familiar companion as I chatted with my new colleague, occasionally sneaking a smoke, a habit Andy didn't condone but one I indulged in when he wasn't around. By 1:17 a.m., the familiar voice crackled over the radio: "Gravel base, heading to the tech stop officially." We didn't have lunch breaks, but we were given a couple of hours for inspection and maintenance of the locomotive. It was up to each crew how to use this time. We stopped midway, about 7 kilometers from the station, and an equal distance to the gravel base, a convenient spot to catch some sleep. The surroundings were familiar: darkness enveloping us, broken only by the dim glow of the locomotive's lights and the occasional sound of machinery from the nearby industrial sites. The single track stretched ahead, disappearing into the thick forest on both sides. Applying the brakes, the engineer settled back, his feet propped up as he scrolled through his phone. A lazy jerk, I thought to myself, irritation bubbling beneath the surface. Could have helped with the inspection. Grabbing a flashlight, hammer, and gloves, I clambered down from the locomotive to check the running gear. Wading through knee-deep snow, I circled the machine, performing my routine checks. Everything seemed in order. It was time to head back. But as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. A milky sea of fog had settled around us, the railway tracks stretching endlessly into the mist. A lone locomotive loomed just 10 meters away, a majestic hulk of green metal, its light flickering in the veil of fog. The sight was mesmerizing, and I lit a cigarette, the half thermos of tea I had drunk earlier urging me to step away for a moment. Descending the embankment towards the nearby trees, I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness. My footsteps echoed softly in the snow, the quiet broken only by the rustling of branches in the wind. As I relieved myself, A glint caught my eye, a rusty sign peeking through the underbrush, patches of white paint clinging to its weathered surface. Curiosity piqued, I moved closer, carefully lifting the sign from its resting place on a lower branch. TE3692, the faded, rusty number plate proclaimed a relic from an old locomotive, a collector's dream. Wow, I muttered under my breath, inspecting the find with growing excitement. This'll make a great addition to my room, or maybe even the car bumper. But my moment of triumph was shattered by a sudden crack from my right, a noise like a large bone snapping, disturbingly close. Frozen in place, I strained to see through the dense fog, my heart pounding in my chest. 15 seconds felt like an eternity as I stood there, the cold creeping into my legs, either from fear or the biting chill of the night. Slowly, cautiously, I turned towards the source of the sound. The beam of my flashlight faded into the fog, revealing two bright dots in the distance, eyes glowing eerily in the darkness. Some animal, I muttered aloud, my voice betraying my unease. Probably a wolf. But as I watched, the eyes didn't move away as expected. They remained fixed, unblinking, staring back at me. And then, without warning, they vanished, fading into the fog, as if they had never been there. A chill ran down my spine, goosebumps rising on my arms as I scanned the surrounding darkness. The forest was silent, too silent, devoid of even the distant roar of diesel engines. Had the engineer shut off the locomotive? Or had I ventured too far into my own mind, hallucinating from lack of sleep? Shaking off the unease, I gripped the sign tightly under my arm, hurrying through the snow back towards the safety of the locomotive. The warm, bright cab seemed a sanctuary against whatever lurked in the shadows. I didn't want to dwell on what I had seen, my thoughts racing as I trudged back through the snow, branches crunching underfoot. But then, just as I reached the locomotive, another sound different from before, a sickening crunch like breaking bones echoing behind me. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I listened. This time, there was no mistaking it. The sound came from behind me, unsettlingly close. 15 seconds passed like an eternity as I stood there, heart racing, mind racing through 1,000 possibilities. Finally, steeling myself, I turned, flashlight beam cutting through the fog. And there, 10 meters away, the eyes were back glowing, moving slowly in a figure 8 pattern, accompanied by the nauseating sound of bones crunching. Panic surged through me, drowning out the cacophony of whispers, voices that seemed to penetrate my mind, male and female, young and old, speaking in a chaotic symphony of incomprehensible words. Run, a voice in my head screamed. Run. I turned and fled, legs pumping, heart pounding as adrenaline surged through me. Dodging between trees, leaping over ditches, I ran like a man possessed, the precious sign clutched tightly in my hand. The forest blurred around me, the snow muffling my footsteps as I hurtled through the darkness, every nerve on edge. Minutes passed in a blur of fear and exertion. But as I burst through the thick snow, the forest gave way to open ground, the railway embankment rising like a beacon in the night. I scrambled up its gravel slope, lungs burning, legs aching, heart still racing. And as I stood there, breath ragged, a strange calm washed over me. I was out, safe. But then reality crashed back, and where was the locomotive? I spun around, scanning the fog-shrouded landscape, but the familiar hulk of green metal was nowhere to be seen. Confusion gnawed at me. Had I veered off course in the forest? Or had the locomotive moved further along the track, obscured by the fog? There was no time to dwell. With resolve, I set off towards the gravel base, footsteps crunching through the snow, eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of familiarity. The rails were old, rusted, the ties rotted, a testament to years of neglect. I kicked at the snow, dislodging a piece of frozen, decayed wood, a wooden tie infused with the familiar scent of creosote, a smell that clung to railroads like a ghost of their past. What a mess, I muttered, glancing around uneasily. The rails stretched ahead, disappearing into the fog. But before I could gather my bearings, a sudden sound, a rough, overlapping cough jerked me around. 50 meters away, a shadowy figure staggered towards me, indistinct yet undeniably real. Panic surged. I turned and ran, mind racing with questions. What was that? I passed this spot half an hour ago. How is this happening? Fear propelled me forward, feet pounding the familiar rhythm of the tracks beneath me. But as I ran, Doubts crept in had I somehow circled back on myself. The landscape seemed different, the fog less dense, the surroundings oddly clearer. And then, ahead, a colossal silhouette loomed against the foggy horizon. Relief flooded through me. The diesel locomotive, its engine rumbling softly, stood like a beacon in the night. With renewed energy, I dashed towards it, scrambling up into the cab, slamming shut the outer doors behind me. Heart still racing, I sank into the seat, exhaustion washing over me like a tidal wave. I had made it, safe for now. Morning came, and we handed over our shift at the station. In the smoking room, older workers spoke in hushed tones of Andy's troubled past of tragedies and ghostly encounters at the notorious 276th kilometer. Intrigued, I sought out a mechanic who filled in the gaps, a tale of sorrow and spectral happenings that plagued the stretch of track. Back in the early 60s, the mechanic recounted, the 276th kilometer was a desolate stretch between stations. A locomotive engineer, haunted by tragedy, had lost his wife to madness and death, her final act a desperate plunge in front of a passing train, the very one her husband was driving. Since then, strange occurrences plagued the area's signals turning red inexplicably, radio crackling with eerie whispers and children's cries, and sightings of a spectral figure in the fog. "And what about John Black?" I asked, lighting another cigarette, curiosity burning in my chest. The mechanic's gaze sharpened, as if I had stumbled upon forbidden knowledge. Reluctantly, he revealed another chapter of the cursed history. In 1977, John Black was the engineer, a man whose name was synonymous with tragedy on the rails. Half the spikes mysteriously ripped from the sleepers, the train derailing with fatal consequences. Andy, his assistant, had survived, but at a cost, haunted by visions of John Black ever since. It dawned on me then, Andy's urgent trip wasn't to visit family but to pay respects to a fallen colleague, to confront the specter of the past that haunted him still. Haunted by what I had seen and heard, I wasted no time in submitting a transfer request away from that cursed stretch of track, away from the memories that lingered like shadows in the night. I found solace in a smaller station, where the pay was less but the chance of encountering that malevolent presence was slim. Andy retired peacefully, as much as one could after a lifetime haunted by the rails. Yet the horror of that night never left me. The recent discovery of mutilated bodies and an abandoned locomotive on the 276th kilometer confirmed my resolve never to return.